Now, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry has started its Eskom probe. Over the next 2 days, the inquiry's legal team will table the utilities reports. eNCA's reporter, Erin Bates, as always, has been following those latest developments very closely for us. And Erin, we come to you to help us make sense of all the information that's rushing towards us. We've heard from Advocate Maleka this entire day, and he's introduced about 6 reports into those problems at Eskom and suspected irregularities that will be relevant to state capture. That's a lot of information. How much detail has he been able to go into?
Marcel, he has here and there gone into some depth, and what's critical is the new evidence and information that Advocate Maleka has highlighted in this overview we've had this morning on various reports, 6 as you say so far and counting, on Eskom and irregularities at the utility. And critically on that new evidence, we've heard that Trevor Manuel will be here on the 28th of February to discuss what former Sports Minister Fikile Mbalula said about his appointment to Cabinet during an NEC meeting. We've also heard that never before seen on Maleka's submissions today, information on Huarong, which is a Chinese company, and a loan agreement between it and Eskom, specifically details on financial flows and transactions, which investigators for the inquiry have looked into, will be tabled here during the 2 or so weeks on Eskom and related issues. So there are 2 new and quite critical pieces of information that we've had out of Advocate Maleka this morning.
Now, as we've covered the Eskom story over the last few years, there have been more questions than answers as to what's been going on inside the power utility. And one of them that affects all South Africans is indeed the cost of electricity and the cost of keeping the lights on in South Africa. One of those reports, as you've just said, that will be important to that is that Denton report around the cost of coal. How close do you think we might be able to get to finally finding answers as to what exactly was going on there, particularly in a connection to the cost of coal and the impact that it had?
Yes, I think that's a quite perceptive question. And in fact, Advocate Maleka has hinted at some of the questions the legal team has been asking about Eskom and tariffs at that power utility during his presentations this morning. And in fact, speaking of the Denton report, this is a report that was filed with Eskom in about mid-2007. It made recommendations on tackling the issue of load shedding and pressure on the power grid. And yet subsequent reports in the timeline of reports that Maleka has filed still deal with the same issues. And Advocate Maleka and then Chairperson Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo saying it'd be very worrying if the people at the national utility who were meant to be solving these issues on load shedding were doing other things and perhaps dancing to the tune of people outside of that national utility. And so that's among the issues that they'll be covering. And of course, there's also the whole question of coal supply, because that resource is one of the critical resources when it comes to generating power for the national grid.
Now, quite fitting that this is the first SOE that the Zondo Commission has decided to look into. It is going to be a very important litmus test for the work of this commission. But we're hearing names that we haven't heard for the last a little while. Resources Minister Musibeni Zwane. We're hearing McKinsey. We're hearing the New Age newspaper. A lot of information here pertaining to stories that were a large part of our news headlines over the last few years.
Yeah, into the last decade and longer. And you've almost got to scratch the wax out of your ears. It's been filled with the names Agritzi and Bosasa the last couple of weeks at the State Capture Inquiry. Now we're back onto, as you say, the likes of the New Age, Tegeta, Optimum, Eskom, Trillion, McKinsey. The list just goes on. And it is really going to be quite a dense period of work here at the Commission. Advocate Maleka is saying that the reason that they're honing in on Eskom is not only because of its importance in terms of the national grid and how it affects ordinary South Africans and the economy, but also because the scope of its budget. And he's argued that the way in which Eskom was captured was through procurement.
Now, it can't be lost on anybody that it's quite dramatic that we're hearing this information coming out of the Zondo Commission as we also await a very important budget speech from Tito Mboweni. And a large part of the focus of his speech, people are hoping and expecting, will focus on how exactly they're going to get Eskom out of trouble. One almost needs to have a split screen. How much time at the Zondo Commission are we expecting will be kept aside or used to try and find out just how deep the problems are at Eskom and indeed what the source of those problems were?
Well, so far we understand that 2 weeks have been earmarked, and that really is a quite ambitious project, 2 weeks for this national utility and problems spanning over a decade. And that's why these reports are being tabled, because Advocate Maleka says that they've traversed a lot of the same concerns that the inquiry needs to look into. And I hear you mentioned there the budget speech coming up from Minister Mboweni when Barbara Hogan was here talking about public enterprises, and she said the name Eskom. We had some rather badly ill-timed power cuts at this venue. So let's hope the same thing doesn't happen when our finance minister talks about the power utility. It's a critical question what the state's going to do to maintain Eskom's debt and potentially bail it out of trouble. But I think what's also important to mention there on this national budget and the question of Eskom is the legacy of governance issues within the power utility and the kind of problems that the state faces now on account of decisions and politicized SOEs in the past.
We're going to leave it there for now.